Alaikum.
Alaikum, sir. Very welcome.
So should we begin?
Yeah, I think it's about time if everybody's here. Is Dr. Talat Shabir here?
Yes, Dr. Talat is also here.
All right. Okay, then let's go ahead.
Just Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and good morning. And welcome to today's panel discussion on the role of China in the Middle East and Africa. Now, as you all know, China's Belt and Road Initiative, that is the BRI, stands out as the most important example of the pivotal shift in China's foreign policy, from Deng Xiaoping's Biden height philosophy to the current ambitious endeavors China is taking. Now, the BRI is a mega project focused on increasing connectivity by opening up avenues for diplomatic and economic activity, thereby cementing trade and commercial ties between China and its partner countries. Now, over the past few years, China has substantially increased its economic and diplomatic dialogue with countries in the Middle East and African region. Now, in the case of the Middle East, this can be evidenced in the sharp increase in trade between China and the Middle Eastern countries. Chinese investment in the Middle East focuses on infrastructure, construction, agriculture, finance. However, the energy sector remains the substratum of China's association with the Middle Eastern region. Now, this can be highlighted from the fact that from 2013 to 2019, over 56% of Chinese investments, amounting to about $75 billion, were energy-related projects. This trajectory is anticipated to continue in the future, with the International Energy Agency forecasting that China will double its oil imports from the Middle East by the year 2035. Furthermore, both sides have mutual interests in integrating the BRI into national regeneration schemes, such as the Saudi Vision of 2030, the UAE Vision of 2021, Jordan 2025, Turkey's Middle Corridor, and Kuwait's Vision 2035. Now, it is also a similar story in Africa. China has rapidly been making inroads in Africa by focusing yet again on economic growth and development. China has taken a multi-pronged approach in its economic relations with Africa, as it is a significant source of foreign direct investment. China is now Africa's biggest trading partner, with trade amounting to 200 billion annually. Beijing is investing in infrastructure, agriculture, mining, telecommunications, and yet again, the energy sector. Africa is now Beijing's largest market for overseas construction contracts. Now, to maintain this momentum, in 2019, Beijing announced a 1 billion Belt and Road Africa Infrastructure Development Fund, as well as a $60 billion African aid package in 2018. Moreover, the more recent extraordinary China-Africa Summit on Solidarity Against COVID, held in June 2020, has further cemented and strengthened ties between China and the African bloc. Now, therefore, in order to assess China's footprint in the Middle East and African region, as well as other aspects and dimensions of China's expanding role, we have an esteemed panel of discussants with us here today to discuss these developments and more. So without further ado, let me just introduce the panelists that we have. Let me begin with Dr. Zahid Ahmed, who is a research fellow at the Deakin University, Australia. We also have with us Dr. Talat Shabir, who is a director for the China-Pakistan Studies Center at the Institute of Strategic Studies. And we have with us Ms. Maria German, who's from the School of International Relations and Public Affairs. She studies at the Fudan University, but is currently joining us from Moscow. Now, let me begin the discussion by first handing the floor to Ambassador Aizaz Ahmed Chaudhry, who's the Director General of the Institute of Strategic Studies, to give us his views on what is China's overall approach in the Middle East and Africa. So I'll begin with you, and then I'll move on to the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Amina. It's a very interesting topic. naturally, we see that the world is gripped with a future that involves China a great deal, and everyone is trying to figure out how would the future pan out for them. The two regions, Middle East and Africa, are also equally important. And when I and Google China in the Middle East, a number of articles appear. Some Google Scholar articles, the others. What I noticed was that the articles appearing mostly from America, from the United States, uh, spoke in very cautious terms, described the Chinese presence in the Middle East in very cautious terms, like Rand's study of the very dragon in the Middle East. And when you come to Europe, you find that the Europeans suspect that China is up to some kind of great game in in the in the Middle East, and so. But I also noticed that on the whole, there are three dimensions which everybody is discussing. One is, of course, the economic dimension that, Amina, you also highlighted in your own introductory remarks. That is the dominant flavor of of Chinese presence in the Middle East. The political side, I think Chinese have been reluctant to engage closely. Um, the evidence is in the Arab Spring also, we didn't find Chinese playing much role, and even lesser on the security side, where perhaps Russia is taking a bigger role than China is. So it's mainly the economic presence that we would probably be discussing today, and looking forward to hearing from the colleagues from Australia to Russia. As far as Africa is concerned, my sense is that again the views vary from it depends on who is speaking. Um, Mostly the Africans are quite comfortable because they feel that China has been a good investor, a good trader, a good source for easy loans for capital. And also they are quite appreciative of the delivery of goods and services, quick delivery, in fact. So my sense is that the Chinese also are a favorite partner in Africa, but of course they are in stiff competition with some of the traditional players like the French, who have had a big presence in Africa, like even the United States, and some others are also catching up, like Japan and even India. So it would be interesting to hear our experts inform us on what they think of the Chinese presence in Middle East. My overall appreciation is actually positive. I think it's a heavily economic accent that comes out of Chinese presence in the Middle East and Africa. And once again, very warm welcome to all the speakers. Back to you, Amina.
Thank you, Ambassador Chaudhry. So let me first turn to Dr. Zahid Ahmed, who focuses on the Middle East. And I'd like to hear your views on what your perception is of China's role, presence in the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Ms. Amna, and also Ambassador Aziz for the invitation. Always a pleasure to share my views. And as Ambassador Chaudhry talked about, if you Google, the general perception coming from the West is, very negative in terms of China's economic footprint. Political footprint, of course, is very low. And the security footprint, if we see in the Middle East, is also, like non-existent or very low. I'll go in the order in which I was given, some of the discussion points or research questions. So what is the overall approach of China in the Middle East? As any strong state, China deals with countries on individual basis and is not influenced by one country's conflict with another. That is, I think, a key aspect of China's engagement in the Middle East. We have seen in the cases of smaller countries that often face this challenge of neutrality, but strong states, I think, they, by virtue of their economic independence, they can maintain the role that China has maintained in the Middle East, especially. So in the Middle East, it has strong partners, some, of course, having conflicts with each other. But what I argue is that Beijing's approach is not to take any sides. This has helped China expand its economic interests or economic relations in the region. A key manifestation of course, China's growing influence can be seen through the significance of Belt and Road with reference to the Middle East. And also China's engagement with the Middle Eastern countries, as Ms. Amna also talked about in her introductory remarks, in relation to some specific countries, but also it has a regional approach and has produced some documents like Arab Policy paper in 2016, and also Vision and Actions for jointly building Silk and Road Economic Belt in 21st Century Maritime Silk Road Initiative in 2015. So the cooperation framework outlined in these documents, they focus on energy infrastructure, as we know, because Pakistan is also a member stakeholder in the BRI. So basically, it covers all those themes in investment, infrastructure, and trade. But energy is a key driver of China's relations with the Middle East. So if we look at China's top 15 countries that export oil to China, we have Saudi Arabia, of course, after Russia. And then we have Iraq, Oman, we have Iran, Kuwait, and also the UAE. But what is more important, and I'll focus more on that component also, is China's recent agreement, 25-year strategic partnership agreement with Iran. So estimates are that it's going to be worth $400 billion of investment. It's still a premature stage, hard to tell how this investment is going to move into Iran. But it has shown interest in being involved in the Chabahar port, which, as we know, is part of India's strategic vision. India has invested heavily for a very long time in the Chabahar port, something I'll talk about later on. And some reports also suggest that Iran has agreed to export discounted oil to China as well as part of this agreement. But again, a key challenge always is to get access to these original documents or agreements. So hard to tell what's actually in there. And despite China's growing economic footprint, what is interesting is that China has far less significant security imprint in the Middle East. So this is largely due to many reasons. It has shown no desire to influence the US-dominated security infrastructure in the region. And I argue that it's mainly for the pragmatic reasons as well, because the US has historic and very strong security relations with most of the countries in the Middle East. One recent example is that of the US agreement, weapons selling agreement worth $23 billion with the UAE, for example. So that is just one example. So China has no interest in countering that influence, and nor it can. So there are pragmatic reasons for it staying on the back foot in terms of security cooperation with the Middle Eastern countries. A lot on terms of China's bigger role will also depend on how the US and its allies, for example, India, shape their policies in the Middle East. So while the US withdrawal from the region may provide China with some opening, it is likely that China and India will be locked in a geostrategic competition extending from South Asia to the Middle East. Something I'll, of course, discuss later on in more details. Its policy of conflict avoidance is very interesting. You can call it policy of non-interference, policy of conflict management, maybe not conflict resolution, but I call it conflict avoidance as far as Middle East is concerned. So in a volatile region, which is Middle East, that is crucial to China's energy security and trade, Beijing has an approach of letting the US deal with the mess, which they claim that the US has, of course, played a role in creating the situation in the region, so it should deal with it. And we have seen how China has dealt with the issues in Yemen and Syria, and how it basically adheres to the principle of non-interference as far as the Middle East is concerned. What is interesting is in Africa, I was given one question that what is the overall approach of China in Africa?
We'll
And
come
as I
back
have,
to the Africa part because I wanted to get views of the other panelists as well
okay,
on the Middle East,
okay,
and then we can come to.
So I'll hold on to that then. Okay.
Great. Okay. So now I'd like to turn the floor to Dr. Talat Shabir, sitting in Islamabad, and to give us a Pakistani perspective on what he feels China's role is in the Middle East. Dr. Talat?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amna, for having me here to speak about China's overall approach towards Middle East. Right, when we talk of China's approach towards Middle East, it has to be driven by the China's overall global approach. For instance, China has excess wealth, and China wants to share the benefit of that excess wealth to the developing world with the developing world, and China wants a shared future for the economic partners across the world. China has Belt and Road Initiative, though it's viewed as a revival of old Silk Route, but China wants a kind of win-win cooperation with the countries. When we talk of Middle East, China also has the same kind of approach towards Middle East. When we discuss China's cooperation or China's approach toward Middle East from political, economic, and strategic perspective, so it looks that it is more of an economic focus that China has on Middle East. The second is that I will not go into figures, though I have noted down certain figures, but figures are usually confusing. So $400 billion figure that has been, published in Iranian media has not been affirmed by any of the Chinese media. So that reflects China is very cautious of giving out figures or giving out exact details of what they aim to do in Middle East. Now, China's vision about Middle East, in fact, focuses on its expansion of economic and trade links with the countries in the region. And the way I said, China focuses on shared interests based on new international relations featuring win-win cooperation that is quite often referred to by President Xi Jinping. When we say relations, China also is very cautious of its relationship with countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran. China does not want to get into any kind of controversy in advancing its relationship with these two countries, and it's very cautious. But when we see economically, China for various energy resources has to depend on Middle Eastern country, particularly Saudi Arabia, and to some extent Iran. There is a turf, for instance, when we say there's a American influence in Middle East, and that American influence has been for quite long. So China does not want to get into any kind of rivalry in Middle East. It actually focuses on infrastructure, economy, trade, and issues that do not necessarily concern with the strategic ambitions of maybe China in Middle East. So though US is very cautious of China's involvement in Middle East and China's advances in the Middle East, but I think China will continue to keep an approach in the Middle East, which will be focusing more on economy than any strategic design. Alongside economy, I think China would like to keep a fine balance in its domestic, foreign, and security policies with regard to Middle East. Beijing is also reluctant to expand its level of security cooperation with various states in at least for the moment, for the time being, but because it does not want to get embroiled in regional tensions and controversies. So Beijing's focus is more on trade and economy. Secondly, there's a thought process in Chinese scholarship that if China, with regards to Middle East, involved in security-related issues, or it will in fact wreck the remarkable status that China has built over a period of time. That is related to win-win situation, shared destiny, and cooperation. China pursue a patient and quiet strategy of building array of commercial interests. And alongside commercial interests, China is also pursuing diplomacy and cultural ties with Middle East. So that means China is looking at Middle East as a wholesome region that to have in not exactly in the Chinese game, but I think China would like to benefit from the huge potential that Middle Eastern region has up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maria, let me turn to you. Do you agree with the other panelists that China's policy is primarily driven by economics and infrastructure and development and less on the security front in the Middle East?
Yes, and I also would like to add some more points. Like, as it was mentioned, China has become a real significant player in the Middle East, and it has a wide range of interest in the region, which primarily relates to commercial ties, which includes energy, trade, investment, infrastructure, construction, and of course promotion of the Belt and Road Initiative, that great multidimensional global partnership network. In the Middle East, China seeks to minimize business risks, increase investments, and at the same time to protect them. Also, one more point I'd like to add, besides being a responsible power, China seeks to ensure the safety of its citizens, as a large number of foreign Chinese is concentrated in the Middle East, in the Emirates, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. That means that China's regional preferences are for order and stability. In this regard, China adhered to the principle like development through peace, and it tries to enhance its status as a strong leader through mediating diplomacy. However, it has a very cautious approach to conflict resolution. It becomes engaged with the process, but doesn't play a decisive role because of its principles of non-interference in other internal affairs or non-alignment. But still, probably China will be more proactive, and it will continue enhancing position, not just through the economic leverages, which are very important, but not enough. It will go for more proactive position in mediating diplomacy.
Okay, thank you for that. I wonder if I could bring in Ambassador Khalid Mahmood and ask him for his views, because he has served as Pakistan's ambassador to China. So I wonder if you could give us your take on this, Ambassador Mahmood.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a very interesting topic and very topical also. From what I have studied and after hearing the panelists here, it's very clear that China is gradually gravitating to this area, Middle East and Africa. And the focus, of course, is on trade, investment, infrastructure. But the main driver, as has been pointed out, is the energy sector. That China's appetite for energy resources, oil, gas, it is galloping, by the day. And as you pointed out, that cited, some agencies by 2035, even this demand is likely to get doubled. But main thing is now, is Chinese interest purely now remains economic, and the footprint in political security fields, is it minimal? Yes, at the moment it is so, because China believes in, as it was pointed out, in conflict avoidance, non-interference, and not involving in disputes, but trying to have bilateral ties, not with the region as a whole, but more interested in having bilateral relationship with the countries of the Middle East. But is this going to be so in the future? I think that is a point one should focus on, because it's quite natural, when you have stakes at some place, you then take action to protect those interests. Of course, China wants to avoid, meddling in these various troubles which are afflicting Middle East. But there are factors which will, in my view, impel China to increase its security and political imprint in this area. Not now, not even say 5 years, 10 years, but eventually it will be so. Why? Because, for example, pointed out, by Maria, that more than 500,000 Chinese nationals are out there in these Middle Eastern countries. Then if you have made investment, you want to protect those projects. Then for even energy and trade, commerce, you want to ensure safety of sea lanes, because your interests are now at stake. And so consequently, China has very gingerly been wading into the security and political field. For example, it has established a presence in Djibouti, which is at a very important point in the international commerce sea lanes. Then it has also, contributed thousands of soldiers in peacekeeping operations in Sudan. And also, it is in some other field also. I was saying that the Chinese are gradually, taking up these responsibilities. Of course, they want to work. Cynically, some people say it is good. The present situation is ideal for China because security is being, maintained by United States and pressure in this region. So cynically, people say China is having a free ride, not expanding its energy resources and maintenance of security, which is also essential if you want to have economic activities, but enjoying the fruit of that security, whatever is there, and promoting its economic and these interests. And secondly, they say the present situation is perfectly suitable for China because if United States remain involved in Middle East, it means less involvement in the Asia Pacific. So for these counts, China would try to maintain this situation, that burden of maintenance of security, peace, stability in this area should not fall on its shoulders, but on United States or Russia. And also, this is a kind of a distraction for the United States away from Asia Pacific, which is the main focus of China's influence. So these are the, not that I agree with all these things, but these are the various factors one has to keep in mind. They may not be valid today, they may not be valid in the immediate future, but it is inevitable in my view that at some point China's will have more role in the security and political field. At the moment, of course, its focus is on economic, commercial, soft power, that type of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me turn back to Dr. Zahid now. Zahid, we know that China was one of the first, countries to make inroads into Africa. So again, is the policy, since I think we all appear to be on the same page, again on economics and development, or do you think maybe there could be an expanding role in the security realm for, of course, China in the Middle East, in Africa?
So China's role in Africa is very interesting. So of course, it's not as new as the case of just Belt and Road Initiative and the Middle East. So China has been there in some countries for a very long time. Of course, it doesn't have like India historic roots of its diaspora working in many of the African countries. So the dynamics are different. But as I closely study also South Asia, I've drawn one key lesson in terms of China's approach in Africa. So it tried, for example, for a regional approach in South Asia, it did not work through SARC, and we know SARC's current status. But in Africa, the regional approach has worked very well in terms of China's collaboration with African Union, and that is in a way part and parcel of the way China has dealt with African countries or the developing world as a whole. In fact, African Union's headquarters building in Ethiopia was fully funded by China, I think close to $200 million or something. And that is just one indication of how they have welcomed Chinese aid in Africa. With some countries, of course, the relationship has moved into the security sector. We have the case of Sudan, for example, and other countries where China now gradually also has some kind of security cooperation. Whether this is going to be the case in Middle East and other parts of the world, I think we have to wait and see, because the dynamics are very different. For example, the case of South Asia, where India is the biggest player as of now. In the Middle East also, the US factor is there. Africa wasn't the same. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks also, that China has, as far as my own research on China is concerned, I've explored two things: that it has shown a great deal of flexibility and also pragmatism. So making things work the way they can work in different contexts. So that is my take on also China's involvement in Africa as well.
Maria, let me turn to you now. Do you think it's been pragmatism and flexibility in Africa as well?
Yeah, I suppose the same. China is like the largest trading partner for African continent, and Chinese economic ties with Africa are largely resource-based, but it's still a kind of win-win cooperation, because unless you have good infrastructure, you really cannot have economic growth, and you cannot attract foreign investors. You cannot actually invite people come there and participate in economic activity. So on the one hand, what China does, it provides financial support, investments, and also brings new technologies like 5G or Beidou system, which are very important for African countries. And on the other hand, it exports that raw materials which are necessary for the Chinese economy.
Okay, so now let me turn back to Dr. Talit Shabir. Do you agree with the other panelists?
Yes, to an extent, I agree, because the pragmatism and the flexibility that China has displayed with regards to its foreign relations uh, is there. But when we look at Africa and China's involvement in Africa, China's engagement with African continent, we see there are reasons. One, that it's a reservoir of huge resources that China looks at. Secondly, China's terms of engagements are very flexible and benevolent. Uh, China has been focusing on economic development of African, first on humanitarian grounds. And for instance, China agreed to participate in like 8 peacekeeping missions, and they prefer to have 5 peacekeeping missions in Africa. So through peacekeeping missions also, they are trying to contribute the humanitarian cause and development cause, of course, in African continent. There's another propaganda that goes on against China, is that they have colonial aspirations in Africa. So the African people are, now satisfied that China does not have any kind of colonial aspiration in Africa, and they are there to help them. They are there to help them develop their countries. Another important thing is that China in 2019 offered $60 billion for in shape of development financing. That was the time when European Union and United States actually refrained from carrying out investments in Africa because of their economic situation. That China had advantage, and China committed to more investments in Africa. China has also created a kind of perception in Africa that the global financial institutions like IMF and World Bank have tougher conditions for the development financing than China. China has also a reputation among African countries for being an actor that respects other states' culture. The way I said with regard to Middle East, that China has actually advanced soft power image of their country, and they have been successfully doing it. As I already said, that China's growing international role, be it Middle East or be it Africa, is very pragmatic. And when we look at China's overall approach to their foreign relations, I think China continues to engage with countries with, of course, potential for development, potential for larger cooperation, and China will continue to be pragmatic in their approach towards Africa too. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let me turn back to Maria. Maria, you referred to China as a responsible actor that has used development and peace to expand its influence. But I don't think the Indians and the Americans agree to this. So what are the diverging interests and views of, say, India and the US in these two regions compared to what China entails to do?
Cooperation between, there are growing tensions between the US, India, and China in the region. Cooperation between China and key regional actors could lead for encouraging India to align more closely with the US. For many countries in the region, China, as we already have said, is the top trading partner and key resource of technology and armed drones. For example, China and Iran move closer together, and Iran dropped India from railway project linking Iran's Chabahar to Afghanistan. Besides, China has a successful strategic partnership with Turkey. So in such situation, the shift in geopolitical equation in favor of China could reinforce the incentive of New Delhi to align more closely with the US. And right, the US and India are seriously concerned about China's growing influence in Middle East and Africa. Although China's activity in the region has historically focused on economic ties, and especially this what now is Belt and Road Initiative, but under the leadership of Xi Jinping, Beijing has also increased its military footprint. It deepens military ties with the traditional US allies in the region, like Saudi Arabia and Egypt. US worries about China's activity in the region, first because China has begun substituting the US in certain sectors of the weapon sales market, in particular drones. Second, China also stepped up in its maritime security operations in Strait, and also China participates in the mixed naval drill. Third, China takes part in anti-piracy missions, and this is reinforcing China's growing security involvement in the region. Nevertheless, as of today, Chinese military involvement is minimal. From the China's perspective, China doesn't attempt to undermine American interest in the region. It stressed that these both regions have a large space for cooperation, primarily in matter of regional security. For example, concerning peacekeeping, the fight against piracy, cooperation in security in waterways and sea lines of communication, and other security issues. Both sides have always sought to develop constructive relations based on common interests. The question is in the willingness of the other side.
Dr. Zahid, what is your view on this? Do you agree with Maria?
I have a slightly similar and also a different, I think, approach to how there will be divergent geostrategic interests be involving, for example, especially India and China in the Middle East. In Africa, I don't think so. I've done much research on that aspect in Africa, but I'll focus on the Middle East. Especially in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. I recently co-authored a paper with an Indian scholar in which we actually looked at how the competition, geostrategic competition involving Chabahar Port and Gwadar Port, for example. Doesn't matter how Islamabad and Iran, for example, label them as sister ports. The geoeconomic competition is quite obvious considering how close they are to each other. And considering China's recent agreement with Iran and how that has followed with New Delhi's sort of new offers to Iran, that's also interesting and in a way gives the indication that there is this geostrategic competition involving China and India in the Middle East. What is interesting from Iran's point of view in this, that Iran, of course, still facing sanctions, they want any kind of investment from any country. What is for China's interest is there. China wants, cheap source of oil and more oil from Middle Eastern countries. For India, of course, India wants China out of Chabahar at least. And this has been clear through how India has dealt with or responded to China's agreement with Iran. With other countries, as I've already talked about, the situation will be different because they are more towards the US and less toward China as far as political and security angles are concerned. But only time will tell whether China's economic influence is going to extend into political and security sphere or not. So we'll wait and see.
Dr. Talat, let me turn to you. Now, certain academics are of the view that the United States, being the dominant player in particularly the Middle East, should encourage China, along with other Asian powers, to become more involved in efforts to improve the situation or the stability in the Middle East. Do you adhere to this narrative?
You talk about
The Middle East, particularly.
Right. When as the other panelists also has suggested, has referred to this competition, there is a competition with regards to expansion of influence in Middle East. So, though China is cautious in its approach towards the Middle East, but I think why China is cautious, because there's already American influence exists in Middle East. But China is steadily and gradually making inroads in Middle East, and definitely it's through soft power and through commercial ambitions. Then at the moment, strategic ambitions. So I think China will continue to push for the commercial ties and trade ties, and will benefit from the resources that Middle East has for China.
Okay. Maria, since you are sitting in Russia, I wonder, since China and Russia do share a number of interests and policies in the region, could you give us a little take on Russia's perspective on China's increasing role in these two particular regions?
Well, China and Russia are engaged on all levels in the region, like political, military, economic, and thus they have a rather wide space for cooperation. Both states take cautious steps and trying to balance in favorable relations with all major regional powers. Russia has a tremendous historical experience in the region and devotes significant sources to the development of diplomatic contacts in the region. China, in turn, aims to develop economic ties with the countries of the region, becoming the key trading partner. However, expand interest doesn't work well when the region is in trouble. So the main interest on both sides is in security. From my perspective, both countries complement each other very well. Together, they can become donors of peace and security in the region. Russia has already proved its role as a peacemaker, and China has demonstrated economic benefits. Therefore, the coordination of actions between Russia and China could have a positive effect on regional stability and could open a new space for cooperation in joint projects between Moscow, Beijing, and countries of the region.
Okay, so Dr. Talit, since we've seen China and Pakistan working together on some level within Afghanistan, do you see any prospects of China and Pakistan working together, particularly in the Middle East and Africa?
Right. Pakistan also has interest in Middle East, because we have ties with most Middle Eastern countries, and we have very close ties with Saudi Arabia. We have, friendly ties with Iran and various other countries. Pakistan would love to work with China with regards to its relationship in Middle East, and I think. If we talk of trade and we talk of commercial ties that China wishes to have with Middle East, Pakistan can always be on board, and there can always be a forum which could include Pakistan, China, and Middle Eastern countries. Thank you.
Zahid, let me turn to you and pose the same question to you. Since you have been focusing on this, are there potentials for China and Pakistan to further expand their relationship, their bilateral ties within these two regions and expand?
Of course, I think there is a lot of potential. Again, I'll give the example of South Asia, wherever China has gone with its BRI initiative, I think indirectly it has helped Pakistan in terms of its bilateral relations. I think the causal relationship might not be that clear at this stage, for example, but we have some indications of how some smaller countries like Nepal and Bangladesh, for example, have reshaped their foreign policies in terms of their relationship with India, and how, for example, some recent examples of a telephonic conversation between Sheikh Hasina and Imran Khan. There are some examples of how this can really help also Pakistan expand its relations in the Middle East and Africa. And like any relationship, there have to be, and there are usually win-win scenarios. And I think Pakistan is not just a passive actor in this China-Pakistan relationship. And I think Pakistan will continue to also help China in the Middle East, considering Pakistan's very strong relationship with the GCC states. And I think Pakistan might have already actually played a role in certain conversations. And when, like near to us, we have seen how, in Afghanistan also, since the start of the BRI, and how China has shown a very keen interest in peace and security of Afghanistan. And that's kind of a missing piece of puzzle for China as far as the full potential of CPEC is concerned. If there is no peace and security in Afghanistan, for example, and you have written, Ms. Amna, on these topics, and you know that, to what extent CPEC's full potential will be met if there is no connectivity with Central Asia. So I think it's going to be give and take relationship between Islamabad and Beijing, and it is only going to, I think, expand further the more they cooperate in other countries and in other regions.
Ambassador Chaudhry, let me come back to you. Would you have, since we've had such a broad-based discussion, would you like to add anything to this?
I think I do see an emerging consensus that the Chinese presence in the Middle East and in Africa is mostly economic in nature, and they seem to have not interfered in the regional conflicts, in the political side of the relationships, and less so on the security side. I do see a division of labor between the present two partners, between Russia and China, with Russia taking a lead on the security issues and China taking a lead on the economic component of the relationship. I just want to bring in the larger dimension also. United States now regards, as per its national security document, both China and Russia as its strategic competitors. In fact, the word used is antithetical to US interests, that is opposed to US interests. That competition is manifesting itself most vividly in Asia, in East Asia, now in South Asia, and also in Indian Ocean. It is only a matter of time before this extends to Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I think the groundwork is already being laid for that, and that is why the sea lanes in Indian Ocean and in fact in the Indo-Pacific, entire Indo-Pacific area, will become of critical importance, because whoever controls these sea lanes will actually make the mare go. And we see recently Quad becoming more active, whereby America, India, Australia, and Japan are closely coordinating with regard to what the Japanese Prime Minister used to call FOIP, Free and Open Indo-Pacific region. My sense is that this is going to affect China's oil imports from Middle East and China's exports to Africa, because bulk of it passes through the sea lanes. So I wonder if our panelists could comment on how they see the bigger picture and how it will pan out in the Indian Ocean region. Thank you.
Zahid, would you like to respond first?
Okay, thank you. I think the question is very important one. considering Quad, and Quad is not just the only initiative. Of course, in the past we saw TPP, for example, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Its key agenda was also to counter China's influence, especially economic influence. Quad, of course, looks at more security. It's more security oriented. But if TPP could have gone ahead, the situation would have been different. So in many ways, Beijing can just thank the Trump administration for not signing the TPP agreement. So basically, that could not move ahead. But for now, I think many of the challenges that we are talking about from China's perspective, they are not very serious to really pose any challenges as far as its economic interests are concerned. When we talk about Quad and its joint military exercises, I think for the time being, they merely have a symbolic sort of significance or psychological influence maybe for China. I don't see that becoming any a real threat. Looking at, for example, India and the US are mainly they're two key players in there. Australia and Japan, they have far smaller defense forces and defense capabilities. So we're talking about mainly India and the US leading the Quad. And to what extent that is going to pose a challenge to China's interests, I would say not much. But again, another point I wanted to raise was how China's influence is very different in the developed world and the developing or the least developed world. These are two different worlds altogether. Give you example of Australia, the developed state, the anti-China perception is very, very high. You go to another Pacific state, for example, Vanuatu, where I went last year, they have a very favorable view of China, and mainly because of Chinese development model, and which is very different to that of dealing with the West. Because in the West, for example, I recall Aisha Sadiqa's article. She once mentioned that the US aid to Pakistan always came with the strings attached. The case of China is not the same. They do not want you to get the aid and also promote democratic values or human rights values, as is the case in the West, for example. So there are not many strings attached, and the kind of approach that the developing world has really appreciated. And China has managed to deal with different kinds of regimes. We are talking about democracy in Pakistan to monarchies in the Gulf countries, and hybrid regimes in some parts of the world. For example, in Myanmar, for example. China has effectively dealt with all different kinds of political systems, and I think it has always been a learning experience also for China. And we saw in the case of CPEC, for example, how China learned about Pakistan's domestic politics and readjusted its plans with reference to CPEC and equitable distribution of resources among the four provinces of Pakistan. And so I think similar has been its approach elsewhere.
Maria, your views regarding Ambassador Chaudhry's question?
I agree with the distinguished professors and ambassadors. Yeah.
Before commenting on the global situation that is coming up, I would just, for the previous question, I would like to suggest that I think CPEC can be a focal point for cooperation for Middle East, China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and beyond. And CPEC has potential to provide a forum, the economic forum, and economic connectivity forum that can help these countries come together and come closer. With regard to the situation, I think there's a global competitive regime is emerging, and in which there's a Quad, there's US-China rivalry, there's India-China rivalry, there's some squeeze in the South China Sea, and China, as ISAB has commented, that China has been dealing with all kind of pressures and threats very effectively. In my assessment, China is likely to be to experience discomfort because of these issues, because these issues will continue to happen in the global, when we see global political and political structure. We find this competition, this friction, this will continue to be there, because there's a sitting superpower, and there's a aspiring superpower. So this rivalry will continue for quite some time. But China, that China deals with these issues effectively, and China will be at a discomfort, while dealing with the situation. But I don't see any of these issues posing serious challenge to China. Second, China, through Belt and Road Initiative, has gotten into a economy mode, a win-win mode, and cooperative mode. The countries, more than 70 countries, he has brought in the mode where he has convinced countries that, look, we are for economic cooperation, we are for connectivity, we are for prosperity, we are for shared future, we are for win-win cooperation. So I think the narrative that is going to emerge is that the world at large should go into a cooperative mode where they can change lives of their people. And through China, I think more than US, China has effectively made ingress in all the countries where it has taken its BRI too. And China is likely to have advantage of this venture. Thank you.
Let me just ask you, Dr. Talit Shabir, since were talking about China, Pakistan, and potentials for collaboration. So considering Pakistan's Engage Africa policy in the backdrop of China's broader engagement in Africa, do you see potentials on this front?
Yes, I think this is a very timely initiative that Pakistan has begun to, look at Africa as a potential region. So I think it's very important to, look at the opportunities, look at the possibilities where Pakistan can initiate cooperation with the whole of the African continent. And, since we have very good relations with China, there can be a very, very strong forum, very, very effective forum, can be created, with the help of China, Pakistan, and African continent. And we can always dovetail our I think it's a newer Africa policy that we're trying to formulate or devise. So if this happens, I see a very bright future, very bright prospects of this not triangular, but China, Pakistan, African continent relationship.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we have a number of questions from, people within the research team as well as from outside. So I'm going to pose them to different panelists. And let me just begin by asking, and I think this would be more relevant for maybe Dr. Zahid or Maria to comment on. This is from Mirza Hamid Hassan, who asks, will the recent establishment of diplomatic relations between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain have any impact on China's interests in these particular countries?
I think it's not going to affect China's interests as much as Pakistan's, of course, relations in the Middle East. And as I mentioned earlier as well, China deals with its relations on country-to-country basis. So it does not bring in a third country's relationship into the equation. For example, Pakistan tried to do the same in terms of the Qatar Gulf crisis. China has a similar approach we have seen in the case of Iran and its disputes, for example, with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are also China's, top partners in terms of its energy imports. So I don't see that is going to create any challenges for China because it has completely put aside those issues that may affect some of its partners like Pakistan, like other maybe Muslim majority states. But I think China will continue to have normal relations despite the fact that many of the Muslim majority states are now normalizing their relations. I think Sudan also recently also normalized their relations with Israel. Sudan has been having very close cooperation with China for a long time. I don't think so that will change in any way after what they have done recently in the case of their relations with Israel.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And China favors multipolarity. It rejects the model of division between allies and rivalries and works with all parties, with all countries, with all actors in the region. And its policy based on those 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. One of them is like non-interference in the other's affairs.
Zahid, we have a direct question to you from Pradeep, who says, China may have funded the African Union headquarters, but China's instinct is to deal with each state on a bilateral basis, as we have seen in ASEAN. What are your views?
I think it's interesting. China, it's not one nor the other. I should have seen maybe that it uses both approaches. I recall that I think I said that it has bilateral approach, but in Africa, we have seen that its regional approach has worked also very well in its favor. China, of course, has very strong bilateral relations with the African countries. So is the case of members, also institutional.
I think we've lost, we'll try reconnecting. There's a question. Maria, let me pose this to you and to Dr. Dalit. Now, China's 5G technology has been resisted by the US and the West. How about Middle East and Africa? How receptive are these regions to technological cooperation with China? Maria, let me start with you.
Well, first of all, China also developed the digital Silk Road, and the improvement, the development of 5G and this Bilateral system, which I also mentioned, is one of the main concepts of this digital Silk Road. And I can see that it has a very great perspective in the Middle East and Africa.
Zahid, can you hear us?
Yes, absolutely. My apologies.
We lost you in between. Do you want to complete your answer, or were you done?
I was almost done. I don't know where did you lose me, but if you could remind me, I could continue from there.
Well, you can just give us a quick recap of what you were saying, because in between we lost you completely.
So I think the gist of what I was trying to say, that it's not the one or the other option between bilateralism and a regional approach. In Africa, China's both approaches have worked very well because it in a way favors both. It has tried to do the same in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, of course, with not the same level of success. But in Africa, it has, I think, achieved a lot of success in terms of its engagement with the African Union. And of course, it's bilateral relations.
Okay. Dr. Dalit, would you like to add?
We were actually talking about technological advancement, which is, in fact, one of the causes of friction between the US and China is technological advancement that China is trying to. In technological advancement, China is trying to overtake the US. So, for instance, and technology not only brings comfort, it brings efficiency. and not only and it works for all the domains, may it be political, strategic, military, defense, trade, commercial ties. So the technological advancement is key to modern day success, and of course, anybody who is technologically strong in coming era, future, will be ruling the world. So any country like Pakistan would love to have technological cooperation with China, because to improve all kind of a wholesome improvement in all the domains that both countries work. Similarly, I think African continent would too be interested in technological help that China can extend to them, and that is what is actually a way to have, because if you want to have a matching technological or matching trade commercial ties with a country, you need to be having matching technology to support it. So I think African continent would too be looking for technological cooperation in science and technology with China.
We have a question from Dos Mohammed, who's a research fellow at the Institute. He asks that the current Malabar exercise of Quad countries in the Indian Ocean is attributed to countering China's influence in the region. How will it affect China's sea line routes, particularly for its energy needs from the Middle East? Zahid, would you like to respond, or Dr. Talat? Zahid?
I think in a way I already have answered the question earlier with reference to what kind of challenge Quad can pose to China's interests. So especially talking about, for example, Asia Pacific region, I don't see Quad, and I think Dr. Talat also talked about this, that this is not going to pose any serious challenge as far as China's economic interests are concerned. We are not talking about pirates here. We're talking about states that are members of Quad. I don't think so they will behave irresponsibly to block trade routes for China. I don't think so anyone is looking for that kind of a serious confrontation at this stage. Countries do engage in cooperation with other countries, joint military exercises, whether through Shanghai Cooperation Organization or bilateral level between Pakistan and Russia, for example. I think these are just, I think becoming a kind of a norm in terms of countries' relations. Quad, of course, has this more overt kind of objective against China. But I don't think so China will take it very seriously when Quad arranges these joint military exercises.
I agree with Dr. Saab. In fact, it's not very easy to block sea line of communication. And when that happens, I think that will be very, very serious. And as I already mentioned, it is not going to be a challenge for China. And I don't think so there's any immediate threat to Chinese line of communication. One. Second is that we in Pakistan think that since the CPEC is, when CPEC happens, and China is connected through shorter route with the Indian Ocean. So China will reduce its dependence in South China Sea routes. It is not going to happen. Many Chinese scholars think that we will continue to use that route as we are doing. The CPAC will just provide them an extra route which will be connecting them to the world. So there is nothing happening with regards to routes that China will, when they use CPAC, they will discontinue using the other routes that they're using. So blocking line of communications, I think it's not very easy, and it will actually trigger very dangerous rivalry in the region.
Thank you. Just one last question, and I'll pose this to Maria. Now, this is from Arhama Siddiqa, who's also at the Institute of Strategic Studies at the Center for Middle East and Africa. And she asks, the US passed the Caesar Act recently, which impedes investment in Syria. How do you think China will deal with this? Because it is very interested in taking up reconstruction projects within Syria.
Okay, actually, like during the crisis, Beijing provided humanitarian help and assistance and food assistance for Damascus. Being a friendly state of Damascus, China helped a lot. And however, like the unstable situation still in Syria and geopolitical conjuncture generates highly extreme risks for the development, reconstruction, and for the promotion of Belt and Road Initiative, because Syria is also a very important step point of this initiative. So therefore, Beijing is rather cautious in engagement of Syria rebuilding process, and first of all advocates for the stabilization of the situation there, and also encouraging states to create a multilateral model of cooperation that will effectively coordinate the interests of all parties based on the political consultation process.
Okay, well, thank you. I think it's been a very, very interesting session. But I think all three panelists agree that China's expanding role, whether it's in the Middle East or Africa, is highly welcomed, and it's seen as very positive. So I guess only time will tell whether this is the actual perception on the ground. I think it's, again, a very interesting discussion, and I wish we could continue because we have other questions, but we are limited by time. So in the end, let me just express my gratitude to all the three panelists, Dr. Zayed Ahmed for joining us from Australia, Ms. Maria German for joining us from Russia, and of course, our very own Dr. Talat Shabir for joining us from Islamabad in the ISSI. I'd like to thank everyone once again, and this is being live streamed, so if anybody missed any parts of the proceedings, you can watch this on our YouTube channel. So thank you once again on behalf of the Institute of Strategic Studies for joining us. Good afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.